Good evening, and welcome to Momentous Live, episode 134. I'm Tristan Jutra.
I'm Will Silver.
And I'm Jerome Matthew.
Filling in for the lovely and talented Tasia Custody, the ever so brilliant Gray Williams. They are both unavailable this evening for various reasons, but Jerome's here to help us wade through the scary details of Apple's Scary Fast event, which took place yesterday. It's an unusual little event. But before we get to that, we have another unusual little phenomenon, and that is in the app called Temu, which apparently is the purveyor of a whole lot of crap, including a lot of Apple knockoffs. And there was one reviewer who bought a bunch of these things online, including Apple AirPods Max, just to see what they were like, with some interesting and mixed results. Also, the AirPods, fake AirPods 2, Apple Watch Ultra bands. It's a little harder to go wrong with bands. MagSafe battery packs and the like. So instead of paying anywhere from, $69 up to hundreds and hundreds of dollars for the Apple AirPods Max, you can get this stuff for like between $10 to $15. So your mileage may vary, but Jerome brought to our attention that this app may be problematic in some other ways. Can you tell us about it, Jerome?
I was curious about this because I saw this app popping up everywhere and with people showing this big box of stuff that they got for $5 on it. And I was like, this looks very sketchy. And then, I started hearing people posting about, I think there's something wrong. Ever since I started using this app, my credit card got used illegally and a bunch of my information is leaking around. And I was like, oh yeah, here we go. This is, look into the app, who's behind it. And it's this Chinese company who's notorious Pinduoduo for doing the same thing in China, and figured, I guess they'd reach out to the Western world. And now they're facing a class action lawsuit for exactly that, is breaching all kinds of user data, probably selling it in the dark web, and making a lot of young people's lives who think they got a great deal miserable. It seems. So,
well, having been a resident for the major part of the last decade plus, Jerome, what can you tell us about the market for counterfeit goods there?
It is shockingly widespread and complete. Like, I've seen huge books of even pro audio gear. Why would they bother? But they have knockoffs of this stuff, and I have tested some of it because I got my hands on a Shure microphone, which I had the original of, and did a comparison, and it surprisingly worked at 1/10 of the cost, but barely usable and sounded terrible. Anything with a battery like you showed here, I would really highly question, and
don't take it on an airplane.
Yeah, just probably a little bit dangerous. But it's really terrible. I mean, anything sound wise is really terrible. I mean, basically unusable. So I really don't get what the point is. Now, if you want a pair of $600 Balenciaga shoes, on the other hand, now we're talking, you can get it for $60 and it'll probably last you a few years, and that's a different story. But any audio and electronics gear, absolutely not. I mean, it's pointless. But they've got literally everything that you can want on Taobao, which is the Chinese Amazon. And so it makes sense that Temu is like, hey, let's sell this stuff overseas, and let's give people deals so we can. I think Temu seems to be less about selling this stuff and selling stuff at a discount, and more about mining people's data and selling it. Is what this looks like in far as people's comments and far as people's concerns, and then now this class action lawsuit. It seems to be more of a data mining app than. Have you guys heard of it before? Had you heard of it before this information came out?
I've heard of Temu, but never dug into it too much. Again, it's one of those things where if a deal seems too good to be true, it usually is. And there's been a number of YouTubers who have gone and purchased fake stuff and tried it. I think Luke Miani is one of them as well. And again, the results are usually pretty terrible, but sometimes people don't care so much. They want something that just looks like the real McCoy, if that's important to them. And when it's hard to argue, if rather than spending $549 US for Apple AirPods Max, you could spend like $11 or something and get something that is terrible, but probably not as terrible as that price would suggest, right? Will, have you ever come across TV? Have you ever been tempted to purchase any goods that you knew were counterfeit for whatever reason?
Not really. I've never heard of this Temu. I mean, I've seen a lot of dodgy stuff around, either on Amazon or, to Jerome's point, I saw some stuff that was very questionable on Reverb, which is a legit website for reselling audio gear. And like the same seller in China had like 3 of the rarest DJ equipment, like pieces of equipment. Like, how does one person have, like, we're talking about turntables that 50 were made, it's like, how do you have that and 2 other things that also just happen to be super expensive? So it's like, something just doesn't smell right there, right? So I mean, maybe there's an explanation, but it just smells dodgy.
Well, it seems like a lot of services nowadays, when they are, or products nowadays, when they are very inexpensive, there tends to be something else to the business model. In the case of, say, Roku branded TVs, or even, I think Vizio, Hisense, TCL, there's a number of like decent quality televisions out there, giant flat screen televisions, LCD and the occasional OLED, that are really aggressively priced. But what some of them tend to do is enable a fair bit of data tracking. So they'll monitor a certain corner of your screen, for example, and even just doing a small square, they can figure out what it is you're actually watching, and track that, use that to inform their own data models, perhaps repackage and resell that data to data brokers or others to whom it might be interesting, and they have your identity. That's the catch with all these smart TVs is you log in, you have to have an account, etc. So that all gets added to your 360-degree profile as a user on the internet. So that's why some people don't mind paying a little bit more to know that they are perhaps not being compromised. Their data is not being compromised in ways such as those. I mean, it's one of those classic truisms. You get what you pay for. Now, moving to legit products from Apple. Last night, we had Apple's Scary Fast Mac event. It was quite unusual for Apple to have an evening event, but I guess they wanted to take advantage of the fact that it was Halloween the next day, and let's have a little bit of a theme. They leaned into it just a little bit. None of the presenters weren't really dressing up or anything like that, but it was typical Apple slickly produced videos, since they've moved away from in-person events. And at this Scary Fast online event, they announced a few things, including the M3 line of processors, the latest in the Apple Silicon, which we started with, the A-series chips, of course, for the iPhones, and the subsequent other custom chipsets for their AirPods and other devices. But Apple Silicon, the phrase really came into effect with the M1 series of chips that made its way into Apple's various Macs, like the MacBook Pro, the iMac, Mac Mini, and the Mac Studio. Since then, about a year ago, we've had M2 making its way to the various Apple computers, desktop computers, and laptops. Most recently with the Mac Studio in the summer, and then the 15-inch MacBook Air. But now we've got the M3, so it's going to be making its way into all Apple's products, starting with the MacBook Pro, the 14 and 16-inch. So there's a whole lot of technical details for those who are interested in terms of of course, there's increased number of cores, You've got your efficiency cores, which they've kind of increased versus performance cores. There's been a little bit of debate about that, but I guess the more efficiency cores you have, the longer battery life you get, and the like. One of the other different things this time around is they've introduced all 3 flavors of the M3 processors at once. So you've got your M3, your vanilla version, your M3 Pro, which is slightly more capable and a higher RAM ceiling and additional external video support capabilities, and then your M3 Max, which is, they're just throwing everything at it. And that's the sort of thing that you get in your top tier 14 and 16-inch MacBooks Pro. So they spent some time, Johnny Saruji, in his underground lab, talking about the benefits of the M3 processors, and then they got into details about the M3 MacBook Pro. So of course, there's the 14 and 16-inch ones. The difference, key difference this time around is they've actually dropped the entry-level price of the 14-inch MacBook Pro down to $1599 US. And so that's a little bit cheaper than it was. But what they've done is replaced what was they had an M1 and an M2 MacBook Pro, which was kind of using the old body style from the Intel days, and it had the touch bar, and so that was kind of rattling around and as an option for people who wanted a quote unquote MacBook Pro, something better than an Air, but not quite as good as the new fancy industrial design and all the features and extra ports of the latest generation of MacBook Pros. So in addition to that, so one of the things with the new base 14-inch model, starts at 8 gigs, and it's just it's really entry level, but it's a good option for people who want a Pro, want something more than an Air, and don't necessarily need things like the touch bar. We'll get into that in a little bit. And of course, the M3 iMac. So it's been a while. It's been over 2 years since Apple released the M1 iMac. We never saw an M2 iMac. Again, just the 24-inch model. The 27-inch is nowhere to be found. And this is I'm going to be 3rd year running this winter when we do our projections and our hopes for the year ahead. The last 2 years, I was like 27-inch iMac or iMac Pro, please. That's what I'm waiting for to replace my 27-inch iMac. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but of course, the latest and greatest specs, much faster. Of course, starting at 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gig SSD, which is crazy low. So you got to spend a little bit of extra to pad Apple's profit margins there to get something a little bit better. But of course, they come in all the wonderful colors and the like. But there's a video from The Verge that recaps the whole event in just 10 minutes if you don't want to watch the whole Apple event, which I think clocked in around 35 minutes or so. It was pretty tight. Before we dig into some of the additional details, Will, what jumped out at you from the various announcements yesterday?
Well, I mean, the evolution of chips is always interesting, and I think that it's, for me, that's the thing that's probably the most appealing, is that they are putting money into improving their sort of offerings, and it's always encouraging. It seems like this set of chips in the last, what has it been, 3 years, is a pretty big quantum leap forward since they've been introducing these ultra mega M3 super deluxe ultra super duper extravagant chips where they're just doubling all the time. I joke, but I mean, I think it is quite an extraordinary series of releases. And while this doesn't encourage me to buy a new laptop any sooner, it is sort of nice to see that it's continuing to progress, and in a few years I'll get an even better Apple.
Well, and that's one of the interesting things in the presentation, is that Apple was spending a lot of time comparing the M3 not to the M2 but to the M1, and in some cases even the very fastest Intel Macs that they ever made, bearing in mind that most people aren't upgrading their computers every single year. To your exact point, Will, I mean, it's still interesting to know how much better it is than last year's chips and last year's models. But most people these days are only upgrading their actual computers maybe every 4 or 5, 7 years in some cases, some people even longer. So, to make a point of saying, this is X number of times faster than our fastest Intel, iMacs and the like, it's really inviting people who are still on the Intel platform to, come on down. I mean, even though it's only been 3 years now since Apple started making the transition to Apple Silicon, so they really want to get people moved over so they don't have to keep supporting Intel for longer than necessary, even though it'll probably be another 3 or 4 years, at least in the operating systems there. Jerome, given your pro needs, especially on the audio side of things, and I know you've been through a couple of machines in the last few years, Intel, and then to the M1 MacBook Pro. Some initial thoughts or impressions from last night's announcements?
Yeah, well, these machines are extremely fast. I mean, I was kind of blown away that already it hasn't been that long since the M1 came out, and we have these new M3s that are 60% faster, and that's for certain industry, they need them as much power as they can get, so this is going to keep Apple ahead of whatever all the other chip companies, including Intel, are probably scrambling to do to get their speeds up. And so now Apple said, well, here we go, we've got these now, and they're way faster than anything else I think that's going to be coming out. So that's impressive. And it's not particularly useful for me, because for me the M1 is more than enough power at this point. I mean, who knows, more and more AI is creeping into my tools, and then if that's the case, you do need the processing power. So, but I don't anticipate needing that kind of power myself, but I do for older machines that we have in the studio that really can't run anything that's out right now. I mean, we definitely need one of the M series chips, but I mean, the Mac Studio is also a great option, I think, if you don't need a laptop and still very fast. I love the black color. I mean, it's been so long that we had silver. It's really nice to see the black MacBook in the offering. So
it's space black, indeed.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can get it for the regular vanilla M3 version of the MacBook Pro. But if you get either one of the Pro or M3 Pro or M3 Max models, you can get not space gray, but space black. And except when you look at it, I've seen some of the hands-on videos, and it just kind of looks like dark gray. So it's hard to get a pure black. Apple has said that they have improved the finish on it to reduce the appearance of fingerprints. That was a real issue with the midnight finish on some of I think it was the MacBook Air models. And fingerprints all over the place. So for some people are opting more for the silver models instead, because they were just less fingerprint prone. But so apparently these are going to be a bit better. But again, in the hand, they're not nearly as black looking as, say, the polycarbonate MacBook from, I don't know, was that the mid 2000s, or even the what were the PowerBooks from the the mid to late 90s as well. Like, those were actual black machines. But since we've got the aluminum finish, it's only so black you can get it. So in my mind, go Vanta Black or GTFO.
I was just about to say, you're waiting for the Vanta Black edition.
I don't want to be able to see any features on that. It just needs to be a black mass that you have to.
The $100,000 Vanta Black.
Exactly. It just needs to be a void sitting that absorbs all light from the room. So, just to the specs of the M3 processors as they're appearing in the MacBook Pro models, the base M3 has an 8-core CPU, so 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, and a 10-core GPU with support up to 24 gigs of unified memory. The M3 Pro has 6 performance and 6 efficiency cores in its 12-core CPU, along with an 18-core GPU, and that supports up to 36 gigs of RAM. So again, these are stepping up from the previous generation in their maximum RAM capacities. And then the M3 Max, which I think is up to 80% faster than the M1. I think it's only like 20 than the M1 Max. I think it's only 20 to 30% faster than the M2 Max, but that's still decent. It's got a 16-core GPU with 12 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. So it's really at the max level that they're really leaning into the performance cores, whereas the Pro and the vanilla versions have equal number of performance and efficiency cores. They're really optimizing for battery life there. But when you get up to the max, that's when you want as much power as you can get. Some efficiency cores from when you're on the road, but really you've got the 3/4 of the GPU being put into the. Actually, no, hang on a sec. There's a typo in this article. It's 3/4 of the CPU. But the GPU that they throw into the M3 Max is 40 cores and support for 128 gigs of RAM. So they are really pushing the professionals up to the high-end models and offering that. But I think before the Max was like 96 gigabytes of RAM supported in the MacBook Pro models. So that's getting up there for pros, which is nice. But again, having that diversity of options, I think a fully spec'd out 16-inch MacBook Pro, M3 MacBook Pro, someone priced it about $7,199 US. So we're looking at the 10 grand range in Canadian dollars. So we'll be putting that on our Christmas wish list, I'm sure.
But if you compare to the Mac Pro and the price wise, I wonder how in terms of specs, like how close it is, to.
Right. Yeah. So the full desktop, I think you're still paying a premium because of especially if you want wheels. And there's the expandability there too. There's a lot of criticism about the M2 Mac Pro compared to the Mac Studio, which seems to be a real sweet spot for a lot of people who don't need the portability. But the premium you're paying in the Mac Pro is for the expandability options, which is largely in third-party cards, not GPU cards. So that's one of the reasons why people are excited about Apple, increasing the GPU capabilities, especially at the higher end with the M3 Max chip here. That's where Apple has still been lagging because NVIDIA is still cranking out like dedicated chipsets, which are really the industry standard. And it's not just about gaming, even though some people think that is Apple really trying to court high-end gamers here? Who knows if high-end gamers and developers will take the bait? But a lot of AI tools really lean on GPUs. So that could be what they have in mind there. One of the other features, for the first time ever, native to Apple Silicon with this M3 series of chips, is ray tracing. Now, Will, as a little bit of a gamer yourself, what is it? How could you explain the benefits of ray tracing to the average person who may not be like a hardcore gamer or anything like that, but has heard this term before? I remember first hearing it in the mid to late 80s with the Amiga. They had some basic ray tracing there. I think it was at the software level, but here we've got ray tracing at the hardware level as a part of the added capabilities of the M3 chips here. What's ray tracing all about, Will?
You're catching me a little bit. I believe that it has to do with modeling light on objects and environmental lighting. Is that correct? I do know that it takes a lot of GPU, and that it is a big benchmark in terms of making things look realistic. I don't know the dictionary book definition of ray tracing, but it's basically just makes things look better and more realistic in an environment.
Yeah, for those who are interested in the details, the idea is like basically more realistic lighting, better geometry handling. The idea, from my understanding, and this is where we're really missing gray, of course, is with ray tracing, it's doing all the tons and tons of calculations simultaneously, following beams of light, how they would interact in and apply to the environment. So where it really starts to show us with things like reflections in glass and mirrors and puddles when you're building these 3D realistic games. I think one example was a few years ago, one of the Spider-Man games that came out, and they were showing with and without ray tracing. I think it was on the PS5, and that when you had ray tracing enabled and it was on a capable system like the PS5, when Spider-Man is going through swinging past office building windows, you see, not only do you see into the windows a little bit, and you see his reflection, and you see just the dynamic interaction of the light reflecting off of the mirrors, off of the mirrored part of the glass, but also how it gets into the environment behind the glass as well. So there's all this sophistication that is just it takes so much horsepower, because normally it's enabled at the software level, but when you have this baked into a set of APIs and for graphics manipulation by game developers at the hardware level, that really helps ease things up for the system, and the GPUs can really just be operated as efficiently as possible to render the most detail for these sorts of photorealistic games. And that's the sort of thing. Sorry?
Can I just add one thing?
Of course.
That Spider-Man game that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm,
the sequel was just released.
Spider-Man 2, which of course confuses me because I think of the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Couldn't they have added a little extra something to the name there? So maybe this will help with gaming on Macs. We shall see. But so as mentioned, they really seem to be targeting the lingering Intel users, people who are still on the previous platform. As we know, Apple was on PowerPC, the Motorola Intel alliance of chips for the longest time, and then they moved to Intel in the mid 2000s, and now the big transition again to Apple Silicon just 3 years ago. And so far so good. But again, the problem is it's that big leap in performance moving from Intel to Apple Silicon, and you're not going to see as huge gains every single year from M1 to M2 and from M1 to M3. But when you compare to say 3 years ago, or when you compare to Intel, this is we're cooking, right? So we talked about black, 128 gigs of RAM capacity in the highest level models. Now, I touched it a little earlier before, we have the new entry-level 14-inch MacBook Pro. And one of the differences with it is that as opposed to the previous entry-level MacBook Pro, which was the 13-inch using the old body design from the Intels. I think, Jerome, you had one of the Intel 13-inch MacBook Pros, so you know what that's all about. So they brought it to the new design language. But one of the key things they did is they got rid of the touch bar. They've also enhanced the display. It's got the higher quality display, better selection of ports. So we've got a MagSafe jack, as well as a couple of USB 4 ports that support Thunderbolt, and of course the new Apple Silicon chipset. And because it's on Apple Silicon, way better battery life. So by Apple's measurements, using their standards, up to 18 hours. If you're doing heavy duty stuff, you're not going to get 18 hours. Maybe you'll get 12. Maybe you'll get 8. But again, way better than you ever would have seen on Intel. And then for the other MacBook Pros that have been updated, I think they're saying about an hour extra battery life from the M2s. And that's thanks to the new 3 nanometer manufacturing process that the chipmaker TSMC, based in Taiwan, has managed to eke out. The closer they get those transistors together, the billions and billions, I think it's like 60 billion transistors, the closer they can cram those together, the faster things can operate, especially on a per watt basis. So that's how you're ending up with the better battery life. So speaking of touch bar, this was something that Apple introduced, I believe, is it in 2016 with some of the Intel MacBook Pro models. And it was the whole idea was going to bring some touch computing to the Mac experience. A lot of people have been calling for a full touchscreen Macs, which Apple never caved on. They basically said, if you want to do touchscreen stuff, here, we've got iPads for you. And, of course, the iPhones as well. And the touch bar seemed like this sort of half measure, but it had, it replaced the row of function keys and with fixed functions like volume and brightness and stuff like that. But you could customize them and even have special graphics and different functions for different apps. So like you could scrub timelines on Final Cut Pro, and you could have an emoji in there for your texting, and you could even have things like brightness and volume controls there, but it would be dynamic, sort of like how a keyboard on an iPad or an iPhone is dynamic, since we got away from physical buttons. Now, Jerome, as someone who had a couple of different Intel generation MacBook Pros, and you had one with a touch bar, what did you feel about the idea of the touch bar and versus its actual execution?
Yeah, I agreed that it had incredible promise, and I wished I had used it more in the computer, but I have other peripherals and devices to control the computer, so it wasn't such a big deal unless I was on the road and I needed the functionality. But I felt I never really programmed it to its full potential, customized it for different applications that the way it could be done to fully use it. I felt so. I'm not that sad to see it go because I'd never really used it, but I felt it was a nice addition and it was promising, and I thought they would explore it more. But for various reasons, I think it doesn't make sense if it's not being used and if it's getting in the way of other developments with the machine. It doesn't make sense because, like they say, you have iPads. You can now sidecar your iPad. You can you have a lot of other options for controlling the computer.
With a touch interface, if you really want that.
Yeah, so it's not a necessary thing. It's almost like a icing, kind of an extra bonus, but not necessary. So I guess they felt it was not worth keeping for those reasons. But I did like the idea of having that customized touch capability where it's also a mini screen. Somehow I hope that it can be integrated, that idea, in the future, but it's not a must. I don't think it's a deal breaker for the machines. So it's not surprising that they got rid of it.
And Apple has access to analytics for how people use their machines, like when you're saying yes or no to the various privacy settings at the system level for troubleshooting and crashes and stuff like that. I think Apple can get a pretty good idea of, at the system level and at the app level, of how much people are actually using features like that. And then they also know how much it costs to include such features at a hardware level, and then also to develop for those features at a software level. And I guess finally after 7 years or so, they decided it was, I think it was just a function of that Intel model hanging around as a lower price Pro option for the last couple of years. But their heart hasn't really been in the touch bar for the last couple of years. So, it had a good 5-year run, and they're like, you know what, this isn't happening. And even their own support seemed lackluster. One of the examples given was, the ability to scrub a timeline on QuickTime Player, but not the ability to do so in the voice memos app. So it seemed really patchy, even with Apple's own apps, let alone third-party support from other software developers. So goodbye, Touch Bar. We hardly knew ye. One last little bit on this Apple event. Some of those watching the event online may have noticed at the very end, it was just this little afterthought. It said, "Shot on iPhone" on screen. And you're like, whoa, wow, actually, that's pretty cool because it looked great. And of course, iPhones for the last several years have been incredible for both for photos, of course. There's great competition between Apple and Samsung and Google, especially in the photos department. But one place where Apple has really stood apart is with recording of high definition and then eventually 4K video on iPhones. And Apple's been dogfooding it a little bit here using their own tools. Now, just to be clear, it's not like they had, Johnny Cerrugi or Eddie Q just holding up their iPhone and recording Tim Cook, or they were swapping out recording each other's. Wasn't quite like that. But there are a couple articles that have appeared, and there's even Apple's own video online that showed, how this actually worked. And so they've got all sorts of additional third-party equipment being used, and the rigs, like crazy rigs, of course, professional lighting, and a pro team of people doing this stuff to make it all look like it was shot on professional equipment. So it's not, you can get some amazing results, but if you want even better results, you want things like gimbals, stabilizers, professional lighting, professional audio, of course, and so on. And all that it takes money and resources, a little bit of skill, even how to operate a dolly properly. Will, you've you and I have worked together in production, video production, TV, and
Mhm.
otherwise here. When you first heard, shot on iPhone, I'm sure that your spidey senses were tingling a little bit, but when you see what can be done with all this extra gear, what does it, make you like? You and I have gone out with like, shoulder mounted cameras and stuff like that. Do you think this is kind of like just more of a gimmick than anything? Like, obviously, it seems to be that there is some market for people using iPhones in like pro or at least semi-pro functions. We've had a couple of movies by Joel. Is it Joel Schumacher had done a couple of movies on various levels of iPhones over the years? I think starting with the iPhone 4S, believe it or not. What are your thoughts on the whole using an iPhone as a video camera for pro or semi-pro productions?
Well, lots of times with I mean, it's good for marketing. It sounds good when you dig into these things like Canon was. This is, I mean, we're talking old news. This was like 10 years ago, but they were pumping that the Canon was it 3D? I think it was, or 1D or whatever was used. I think it was in the Avengers, or there were
maybe
some
the
movies
5D
where they were
at the time.
sorry, the 5D.
Yeah.
That's what it was, the 5D. And when you dug into it, it was like 4 grainy fake cell phone composites and stuff like that. Like, it wasn't like they were filming action scenes or like on the side of dollies or like car rigs with a 5D. No, it was like supposed to be handheld and look like a cell phone. It's like, so it wasn't exactly making it seem awesome. It was like the high quality crappy camera used for the Avengers or whatever. And then I think there was actually a bad action movie about like the US military that was filmed all in 5D, but again, it looked like it was a handy cam compared to the Arias or the Reds or the Black Magics of the world. It tends to be a gimmick. I know, as you know, I'm big into Disney bloggers and other YouTube videos, and a lot of them, not all of them, but many of them just use iPhones because it's easier, and they might have an actual, like you say, a gimbal or something to steady it as they're walking through the park or going to movies or whatever they're doing. So that seems to be a common setup, but again, that's not really, quality of filming is not often a big thing in those settings. So yeah, I mean, I think it's nice to say, but like you say, you and I both smell a rat. It's like, yeah, okay, but you have like lighting rigs and you have booms and you have gimbals and you have all sorts of things, and you have a crew of 24 people doing high speed switching. It's like with monitors and dedicated colorists on a special monitor recolorizing the video before it goes for broadcast. So it sounds good, but it's not just, like you say, Johnny Ives handing off his camera,
coming out of retirement to do
phone.
so.
Exactly. But it's fake.
Well, I mean, fake might be pushing it, but it's just like there's a lot of augmentation going on there, and with
stretching the truth.
And so much of
Apple
that? Marketing too is about aspiration, right? It's like look, we use this ourselves, and sure we and they're it's not like they're hiding it. They actually published a video showing behind the scenes, right? And it's saying, if this can be used by pros, and some pros use iPhones and iPads for some of this work, especially, they're not maybe shooting, like you said, the A footage for the next Avengers movie or what have you, but there's a lot of stuff that can be done, and the ability to get things, the footage into the workflow very quickly, and even editing on some of these devices too in a pinch. But you think about the larger audience of people like YouTubers, creators, influencers, who are like, oh wow, it may inspire them to they may already be shooting on an iPhone, and maybe that because an iPhone might be competing against a mirrorless 4/3 camera or a digital SLR. It's like maybe I don't need to get that Sony or that Panasonic or that Canon camera. I can use my iPhone, and then I can get all the custom accessories that work with that, and kind of get locked further into the Apple ecosystem. The idea is that you don't need that other stuff. It can all be done on iPhone. And so there's, I think, that bit of that aspirational part of the marketing, which is at work here. Look, hey, if it's good enough to shoot like an Apple event, maybe it's good for you with your little YouTube channel with 27 subscribers like us.
Yeah, I will say I do think it sounds really good when you dig into it. Pros will know that it's not,
of course,
not the thing, but it is about getting, like you say, the smaller people like, oh, maybe I could do it. I will say the other big thing that I hear from people that use iPhones for primary recording devices, again, tends to be YouTubers, is their light. If you're doing a lot of walking around and self-filming, a 5D, a 3D, a 60D, these things actually start weighing on your arm after a while. Even the mirrorless cameras, which are quite a bit lighter because obviously they don't have a mirror, which is part of the heavy part in DSLR, is that they still are sort of bulky because they often have the frame. They look like a camera. There's a look to a DSLR. So even the ones without the mirror that cut down some of the weight and are smaller still kind of have the bulky frame of a camera. If you want something really light, an iPhone, a Google Pixel, which is really playing on that, the YouTube, TikTok generation. I've seen a lot of the videos and Tasia's videos. A lot of the features, play on this, edit on the fly, people who just want to do things quick and dirty, YouTubers, TikTokers. So I think like they're really playing up that type of market. They're not going to steal the friend of the show, Jordan. They're not going to steal, you or me to a certain extent, although we might shoot some quick and dirty shorts or something. But, I think people who really care about quality are going to have studio cameras and lock it down and do gimbals and all that kind of fun stuff.
There's a couple of things real quick before that you brought up that I think are good points. One was the lightness factor. For me, the thing is like, I don't like tying up like my phone to do that kind of stuff, like, especially if you're getting calls and messages in and stuff like that. It can be a little awkward having that Swiss Army knife. And, Swiss Army knives are great and all, but they're not great for slicing tomatoes or cutting steak and whatnot. Sawing, or cutting through wire. Like, it's in a pinch, sure. But even when you and I have gone and shot stuff, we've got the reasonably pro gear, and that can get a little bit heavy, and our stuff is light. So the lightness is a huge thing. But I remember, I think it was in 2011 or 2012, 2011 at CES with a friend of the show, Andy Barrar, and I went to the Consumer Electronics Show, and we shot tons and tons of interviews just with my iPhone 4S on a little. It wasn't even a gimbal. It was just like a handheld thing, and we had a mic plugged into the audio jack, and it wasn't awesome. It wasn't broadcast quality by any stretch, but I think we actually ended up including some of those clips on our broadcast TV show. It was like it was rough and ready, as you mentioned. So you take add another 12 years of progress to that, and these devices are getting really, really good. The better lenses, the better sensors, and the increased resolution and the like. So, Jerome, in you're mostly in the audio business, but you've obviously collaborated with a number of filmmakers and the like. Real quick, do you have anything to add on the notion of using an iPhone as a filmmaking tool?
Well, I've actually bought a gimbal for my iPhone to do just short videos and TikToks and stuff, and it looks pretty amazing with something like that, the holding the phone. And I think you guys are forgetting some of the percentage of the world, which is, KOLs and influencers in certain countries, which we're talking in the millions, who are earning millions shooting stuff on iPhones and broadcasting it, live streaming it to make money, basically as their business. And why, if they have an iPhone like this, why buy another phone or camera or something when they can shoot this well, or this decent quality with some lighting and a gimbal? Then why buy additional gear? Like, they can get a good enough result with that, and that's what they're doing because it's good enough, right? It's good enough because they're in Asia, people are looking at this stuff on their phone anyway, so they're not looking at it in a movie theater, so that's good, more than good enough. And if it looks that good, I don't know, for an Apple event, then it's good enough for someone selling stuff online, or whatever they're doing with it. So or making music videos or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of uses that beyond what we think of that are, where the iPhone is like perfect. So it makes sense to do stuff. Makes sense for Apple to do this and show what it can be done, and also show off, their own gear in something like that. I mean, sure, they have additional gear and equipment, but you would, for that kind of production, you need it. You need that to shoot it the way that you want. You need appropriate lighting.
Sometimes even add-on lenses. I know that some filmmakers have used those, like lenses you can really bolt onto the front of the iPhones.
Yeah, so it's powerful enough. Why not use it? I mean, that's the whole point of the iPhone, is to use it for multiple things, depending on who you are and what you need out of it. You can use it for a lot of different uses. I mean, there's no end to the things, right? We used to have levels. I use it for a dB audio meter, which costs hundreds of dollars, and it's good enough to use an app now that's free. And all these devices we used to have, you don't need to have separate devices. So that's the beauty of the iPhone. It is what you need it to be.
And for those who are not familiar, it's Will and you, Jerome, both mentioned it, as did I. A gimbal is sort of like a handle. It's a brace you can put your camera or iPhone in, and then it's got some auto self-balancing electronics in there too, so that you can do really smooth movement. So that, in combination with the optical or digital image stabilization in the iPhones nowadays, you can get some pretty smooth movement recording, with a small, that's the challenge. Like when you're holding a device in your hands, it's really hard to keep it stable. So you've got a bit of onboard processing to stabilize things, like a lot of cameras do. But having, a gimbal, which you can get for like a little handheld gimbal, you can get for less than $100 nowadays, can really up the quality if you're trying to do some movement type shots in your videos.
It can follow you as well. It can follow a person,
right?
And then track them and do all that kind of thing as well. And the iPhone's not meant for shooting, so you need something if you're going to do it seriously, because it's a phone, right? So
you mentioned a term that I wasn't familiar with. You said KOL. What's that?
Key opinion leader. You should know that.
Well, that's. I mean, influencer seems to be the popular term here of KOL.
Yeah, maybe in Asia they use the full abbreviation. That's what I got used to.
Or maybe I'm just out of the digital marketing.
I don't know. I mean, that's what I got used to over there. So it's not necessarily common here, I guess.
Will prefers to consider himself an influencer than a KOL. Maybe you're the KOL, Drew. So speaking of
KOL, patience, move.
All right, Will. We've got a story.
3 people got that joke, and 2 of them are on this show.
Shame on you,
not me,
guys.
So, Will, speaking of video production, what is going on with Snow White and the 7 not dwarves, or maybe dwarves again?
Yeah, I mean, I think I resisted saying stuff about this when it first kind of hit the story, just because some of this is a bit of a feeding frenzy in the worst of social media. So basically, I'll try to give the short version. There's a Disney live action version of Snow White in production. It was originally supposed to come out in 2024.
So sort of like they did with Little Mermaid and Lion King.
Little Mermaid, Beauty and the
going
Beast.
Back to the well, right?
Going back to the well.
Ideas. Yeah.
Now, the difference here is that some interviews came out from what's her name, Renee Zellweger.
Zegler.
No, Rachel
Rachel
Zegler.
Oh,
There we
that's
go.
a different.
And she said some things that Disney fans and movie fans didn't love. I think one of the things that's sort of becoming apparent as we get further in some of these remakes is that they're going a little bit further from the source material. I would have said Beauty and the Beast was pretty close to the source material, obviously, except for things not being fully, old school 2D animated. They were more 3D animated in some sections, and live action actors were involved. This seems to, and obviously, they changed parts of the backstory in A Little Mermaid, which many people were quite upset about. This one seems to have made quite a few more changes, and some of the interviews that she had given seemed to just add fuel to the fire. And then there was some, I'm just going to say it because this is what I've had, pretty bad production shots of the 7 magical people who they didn't want to call dwarfs. And people were pretty upset. And what's interesting, so this video from Fresh Baked breaks it down a little bit and says, they announced just a day or so ago that Disney announced that they're delaying. There's the shot from production of, I guess, the former dwarfs. There. You missed it.
There it is. Yeah.
There. Yeah. So, and people are like, what in...
So they weren't
what
actually,
in the Evil Queen is that?
And they weren't actually little people, except for maybe 1 or 2. And so they were kind of getting away from the fact and trying to be sort of apply some sort of weird kind of political correctness to it. And then you're kind of actually preventing little people from getting jobs depicting these characters because they were so afraid of the stereotypes.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, these are like mythical creatures, and I mean, little people only have so many opportunities of roles, right? Like.
On top of it, it just looks goofy and no context. I mean, I guess we don't get the context, but those outfits, and it just looks like, what is going on here? Is this the Wiz? I mean, what are we looking at there? This is Snow White? Yeah. Like, what's going on?
And so these newer shots.
Now this shot, hold here. So basically what happened and what Dave talks about is that from Fresh Baked Dave, that basically Dave announced that they're delaying it. And okay, that's not uncommon. There has been a writer's strike. There's an actor strike ongoing. This is already filmed. This has already been written. This is in the can. This is post-production. This is being sonicked. They released this shot of totally different quote unquote dwarfs. They're redoing it. They're redoing the dwarfs. So there was such a backlash that now they're teasing this. Now, of course, the internet being the internet, I'm fine with this. This looks fine. Some people don't like these.
Of course not. Yeah.
So you
can't win.
You can please none of the people, none of the time. Yeah. So basically the internet isn't that much more happier from seeing this shot, which to me is what you might expect from a Snow White movie. That other leaked shot that we saw, like I said, it was the Wiz or something. Like it's just so, or Jesus Christ Superstar. It's like it was pretty bad. Yeah. So this is very interesting. They're not admitting at this point that they're redoing the dwarves, but it looks from what we've seen like these guys are not wearing mocap suits. No. These guys are not wearing stand-in suits. These guys are show. These guys are, in my opinion, they're on camera. So they're redoing these guys. They're redoing these gals. So I think this is, and they also announced they're putting $100 million more money into this movie. So that sounds like CGI.
Snyder cut. Here we go.
Yeah.
Are they going to do IMAX and black and white while they're at it? Like,
and they're already $300 million into this. Boy. And this is the problem: is people were like saying this was DOA. Yeah. So they're like, "Oh man, we got to put another $100 million into this. Let's CGI those dwarfs." So yeah, basically this is what we've got so far.
And the irony is that the CGI dwarves don't look nearly as diverse as the human beings that they were casting to try to, get those diversity points there, by including a woman and a few people of color, which sure, okay, it's 2023, but like, are they taking a step backwards with the CGI characters? Although they have diversity of height.
This is another thing people are unhappy about. So you can please none of the people, none of the time. So to me, this is just an interesting thing in terms of using social media to decide your motion pictures. I mean, with Sonic, it bothered a lot of people, and it became a joke.
Oh yeah,
that
the changes to Sonic were an improvement for sure. Like they made him less human-like, teeth, and made his eyes a little bigger, and made him look more like the Sonic well know and love, Sonic the Hedgehog. That is, This feels like, remember when Lucas went and did the special editions of the original Star Wars trilogy movies, and there was a scene I think added in, was it in the first one, in Episode 4, A New Hope, of Han Solo talking to Jabba, and Jabba wasn't originally in that, and it was this conversation, and then he walks behind him and steps on his tail, and Jabba winces and all that, but it was late 90s era CG. It was so not great. But then it came out, the original clip, they shot that scene, and Jabba the Hutt was just a dude. And so this is the same kind of thing. Like, they're replacing the dude with CG characters again. And are they making it better, making it worse? We'll see.
Well, the other funny thing about that, you mentioned the original shot, and I think we're all film nerds. Tristan, you and I maybe are a little bit more involved in the nitty gritty of video editing, but they actually had to manually lift Harrison Ford because they hadn't decided what Jabba was going to be.
Right.
So he wasn't like a slug creature. Yeah. So they're like, oh no, he walks behind the actor, and they because he was like freeballing it or whatever. So they had to make it so like he like fake stepped on his tail or jumped over his tail.
Yeah. So they digitally made him like step up and over or step on. Yeah. It's just.
And they made Jabba wince. Yeah. Jabba's like, ow!
Yeah. And it just ended like
whatever Jabba does, I don't know.
Oh boy!
But these movies like Maleficent, I thought did a really good job of taking the original story and doing something interesting. And like, there's a number of movies like that, and this would be really good if they got it right. But they're just, sometimes the Disney woke thing is just really tired, and I'm so done with it. Like, with trying to please all these people, and like, what? No, the story is a bunch of little people, so just make it like that.
And they were all dudes, and
they need work too. These guys, come on.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, the other thing that people were mad about, we're going to get into this now because Jerome, you brought it up, is that the actress said that she is a strong, empowered character, and they're re-envisioning it for modern times. And I'm paraphrasing here, but basically no prince saves her. That it's about Snow White becoming a leader and discovering herself, and she doesn't need a man to save her.
I mean,
okay, fine. I mean, that's a different story, technically.
Yeah, it's called Frozen.
No.
Let it go. Just write a new story instead of
exactly. This is what people are saying. It's like, this isn't Snow White
for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So maybe you should write some new ones. Like, like the whole Hansel and Gretel thing. Like, does anyone read that to kids? That's kind of disturbing. That's for Halloween, maybe.
Yeah, the original Grimm's fairy tales are pretty dark.
Or like the original. I just recently heard what the original Little Mermaid was, where she was granted human legs, but the curse was that it felt like she was stepping on glass, and it turned out that the prince didn't fall in love with her, and she was stuck feeling absolute pain every time she walked for the rest of her life. Whoa!
Wow, I got dark.
Hey, boys and girls grow up to be happy adults.
Good old Second World War inspiration or whatever, right? Jeez.
Okay.
Be happy with what you're given is basically what it says.
All right, so now we're going to motor through a bunch of additional entertainment news and picks here. I just wanted to draw your attention to a little something called Lisa Frankenstein, which again is a reimagining of the Frankenstein tale here, but it looks kind of cute. Basically, it follows a goth teenager who likes to hang out in a graveyard and fantasize about a relationship with one of its long dead occupants. fortunately for her, her dream boyfriend gets resurrected. And so yeah, it's basically it looks cute. It's a horror comedy, and it feels like similar vibe to that what was that zombie movie with Nicholas Hoult
Oh
a
yeah.
few years ago, Warm Bodies, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so this comes out on Valentine's Day 2024. So fingers crossed that that one. I mean, it looks promising. Hopefully, it's not absolute trash. I mean, it looks like it might be a little actual horror in there too. Like there's some chopping up going on. In other news, things that are in the theaters and live streaming simultaneously right now, you may have seen trailers for Five Nights at Freddy's, which seemed a little familiar to me because just 2 years ago there was something called Willy's Wonderland, which has seemed like a similar premise having to do with a surviving against a bunch of demonic animatronics. But Five Nights at Freddy's, and that one started. Willy's Wonderland starred Nicolas Cage.
Fun movie. I recommend it. Yeah.
You saw Willy's Wonderland?
Yeah,
Nice.
It was fun.
So Five Nights at Freddy's, it's actually based on prior IP or intellectual property because there's a video game called Five Nights at Freddy's, which is a survival horror. So it's almost like the Willy's one. The Willy's Wonderland is maybe inspired by the Five Nights at Freddy's video game. I don't exactly know the backstory there. Anyhow,
it does seem like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the production company made the unusual choice to release Five Nights at Freddy's in the theaters and streaming on Peacock in the United States simultaneously. And apparently it's doing monstrously well on both sides of the equation. So the fact that it was released on streaming simultaneously hasn't seemed to hurt. Or it's hard to say, it's hard to prove a negative, but it's done quite well in the theaters as well. $78 million at the North American box office in the first day, and in the first 3 days, with 130 million globally. So not too shabby. It probably wasn't a huge budget movie, but I think there's been a little bit of pent up demand because it seems like the last few weeks hasn't been a lot to really consider. I mean, New Exorcist has been getting mixed reviews. September, late August, early September seems to be a bit of a dumping ground for movies until we start getting ramped up again, November, December, for some of the big blockbusters again for the holiday season. So I'm curious about this one. It looks like a bit tongue in cheek. We'll see how that one actually is. But I thought we'd just take a moment to talk about some of our favorite, if not horror adjacent, scary, spooky, creepy movies or possibly TV shows that we like to revisit at this time of year. We've got links in the show notes for a couple of articles. One is the best 200 horror movies of all time, brought to you by Rotten Tomatoes, the aggregate review site, and also 10 not so scary horror movies for people who don't like horror movies. So in there we've got some, and they recommend some things like Hocus Pocus, Monster House, Paranorman, Beetlejuice, The House on Haunted Hill, and what else they have here? The Old Dark House, that's an old-timey one. Little Shop of Horrors, Young Frankenstein, that's a classic. That's directed by Mel Brooks, starring Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman, Gene Hackman, Terry Garr. I need to rewatch that. Young Frankenstein's amazing.
That'd be fun.
Paper House, which I'm not familiar with. Apparently it's British. And Return to Oz. I'm not really familiar with that one either. But the main article, 200 best horror movies of all time. Lots to choose from there if you need some inspiration at this time of year or any time you want to get creepy. So let's start with you, Will, because I know you're the... I know this one's tricky.
The killjoy.
Yeah, this one's tricky for you, but I'm sure you've got something. I'm sure you managed to dig deep.
Well, as you know, I'm a movie buff, so I dragged up a bunch of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Now partly I want your guys's yay or nay on a couple of these.
Mm-hmm.
I would say my official favorite, what I would call a horror movie, is Dawn of the Dead, 2004. By Zack Snyder with Sarah Polley. It was a very good movie overall. Obviously, it was kind of one of Zack Snyder's first big movies.
Right.
It's quite a good movie. I also sort of had a brief kind of thing with sort of survival zombie movies. I preferred the sort of The Walking Dead, where it was less about the zombies and more about the people. And this is kind of the prototype of this, where it's about the relationship between these survivors. There are some gruesome scenes, but it's mostly about how these people are interacting and trying to get through the situation. So I think it's a very good movie, and a lot of the people involved in this went on to greater things. Vin Rames was already a star, so he didn't need it. But Sarah Polley sort of, it helped, I think, also with her career as well.
This is 19 years ago. It's hard to believe 2004 is almost 20 years ago.
I know. And a lot of people wanted a sequel to this, and I was desperate, but all the movies that came out afterwards in sort of the Dawn of the Dead type genre were not very good.
Yeah, there was City of the Dead was one, but then
City of the Dead, which I watched and I didn't love.
But then Zack Snyder got to do Army of the Dead for Netflix.
Yes,
and there was there was a couple of them, wasn't there? There's at least
I think there was a spin-off.
The spin-off with the safecracker.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So I mean, but there wasn't a true sequel to this movie. Some people were trying to draw parallels between that and Army of the Dead, but yeah, I mean, many of these people went on and did other things. So and also it was, like I said, 20 years difference or 14 years difference. But yeah, and then on some other movies, I want you guys to say yay or nay. In the horror adjacent, my wife and I just watched this. We're big fans of Muppets Haunted Mansion. And I think I might have mentioned this last year. I'm a huge fan of this movie. It's really good. It's probably the best Haunted Mansion movie, even though I like the Haunted Mansion movie that came out in the summer. Obviously, Haunted Mansion is a Disney property. It's a ride that they have at many of their parks.
That's on brand for you.
Yeah. Now, here are the ones that I would say are horror or horror adjacent. Aliens.
So the second one.
Big fan of Aliens.
Yes.
Second one with an S. The original Predator, which we might have mentioned last year.
Thumbs up to both of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are horror movies, do you think?
But maybe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Aliens,
they're horror adjacent for sure. They're action sci-fi movies.
Sci-fi,
action
horror,
sci-fi.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think that's
the best.
That's
genre.
where I get into it, is the action.
Yeah,
like
that's fine. I mean, there's definitely they're scary too. Like especially the first ones. Like I mean, one of my top ones is the first Alien, because there's the whole mystery about it as well.
Yeah.
With Aliens, it was less mysterious, but still pretty freaky and pretty intense. But the first Predator, for sure, there's the mystery, like who and what is the Predator, and so they're Please go on. You're on a roll.
And then I have one last movie, and this is really, I think it's a horror movie, and I always think of this movie like how well it's shot. And we talk about that latest Batman movie being all wet. The movie that I often think about like that is Seven.
Okay, yeah, sure, that's a good one.
With
1995,
Brad Pitt Morgan Freeman,
Kevin Spacey.
Yeah. So that one just always seems wet and dark and damp, and like you can smell the books, they're dusty and aging, and like it's just
some of the carnage of some of the scenes, the crime scenes.
Yeah. And it's just like that. I think of that movie as being like that and Blade Runner, just like, oh, the city's so dark and wet and seedy, just such a visual, amazing sort of tour de force.
David Fincher directed,
interesting story. I like detective stories, but I think it's vaguely horror. I mean, there's some very brutal
it's
murders,
pretty intense
and
crime story for sure.
Yeah.
No, that's another good choice. And coincidentally, David Fincher directed Seven, went on to direct Alien 3, the controversial Alien 3, which had a pretty different vibe, but I enjoyed that too. Good. Definitely some great picks there, Will. So you did it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Despite your supposed distaste for horror. But, we're very inclusive here. We'll take all types of horror.
There are lots of different types of horror for everyone, probably.
How about you, Jerome? Any which ones come to mind when you want to get your creep on? That sounds
well.
Weird.
I do, not a big horror fan, but I do have my favorites. I mean, Aliens is definitely in there. The first and second Alien and Aliens are really big in my list, but I'm not going to choose those today. I'm going to give a shout out to the Resident Evil series, which I've always
Wow.
enjoyed.
Have they got 12 or 13 of those so far?
Yeah, there's a lot
so
of them.
many.
Yeah, they're all kind of different too, you know.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, there's those are always fun. And then, but my pick today is a really, really disturbing, creepy movie, which isn't the typical horror, and that's why I really like it, called The Descent, a British film,
Oh,
and it's really like unsettling, and so much so that they changed the ending in North America to be a somewhat hopeful ending, because the original ending is so dark.
is
And
that the one with the spelunkers, the
yeah,
cavers?
there,
Oh,
there so
great
there's this
choice.
claustrophobia
Yeah.
element, and then they introduce another element if the claustrophobia is not bad enough,
Mm-hmm.
and that really like takes it over the top, and just you know, it just makes, you know, even if you don't get scared by things and you don't get creeped out, it'll just have shivers down your spine at the end. You're like, oh man, you know, just really well done and unique, you know, in the genre. So I'm gonna choose that one.
That's a great choice. Again, even without the other element that you mentioned, the claustrophobia alone is enough to just really, really get to me. A caving
Yeah.
expedition goes horribly wrong as the explorers become trapped, and ultimately, ... I won't say the rest.
Yeah. And there's a
Good.
sequel, which not quite so
Yeah,
good apparently, but
it was kind
if
of
you want more,
unnecessary.
you know,
Yeah.
there's
I think I saw the sequel. It was fine, but
yeah.
yeah, not really needed.
Yeah.
No, so great choices there too, and we'll have links to all those in the show notes. So for me, like even before I saw this article, one of my top ones for sure was, you know, the original 1979 Alien, is directed by Ridley Scott in the iconic role for Sigourney Weaver, and launched the whole Alien franchise, which were several movies in, and then there was the crossover with the Predator movies, the somewhat not great Alien versus Predator and Alien versus Predator Requiem. Like the
But
first one was,
if you like those two movies, then it's you should watch it, I would say,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And so one of the other ones that I was one of my favorites from the last decade or so. Actually, before that, one in this list, Nosferatu, in terms of a classic, 1922. Super creepy. Watch that on a black and white. Well, it's black and white anyway. Watch that with the lights low. Similarly, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as well. Very, very early movies in the history of cinema, if you want something old timey. From the last 10 years or so, one of my absolute favorites, it's sort of a sci-fi horror-ish, as A Quiet Place. Not part two, but the first one. I haven't actually seen part one yet, because I'm trying to convince Stephanie to... Sorry, I haven't seen part two yet, because I'm trying to convince Stephanie to watch part one with me, and then we can watch part two. I'm still fighting that fight. So Quiet Place came out in 2018, and that was stars and is directed by John Krasinski. Stars Emily Blunt as well. There's an alien aspect to it, but it's very tense, and there's real stakes, and it's a good...
It's quite unique, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of the genre, I would say too.
Yeah, great family film. It's all about family values, and you know what you do to try and protect your family. And then one I have to a more recent one that I saw was I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it for our pick later in the show. It'll be a bonus pick there. But so we'll stick with those for now, because we're already over time and we should probably move along. I noticed in that list is Megan. That was like horror comedy.
Oh.
Very memeable.
That was a comedy?
Yeah.
I didn't even see it, but
Black comedy.
Black comedy. It's, I mean, quote unquote horror, but it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. All right. So time for a quick palate cleanser and getting on to our proper picks of the week. Will's, yours is a real palate cleanser. And it is.
Yeah. So my pick of the week, very different, is again, this may be lost on people who are listening from other countries, but Mr. Dress Up. And it's a documentary about his life and his career. And he was a children's entertainer on the CBC for 30 years. Very closely, actually, connected with Fred Rogers. So just one of these iconic childhood performers. I don't know if you guys watched him as kids,
Yes.
but I mean, this, you've also got to remember, this is sort of like 4 channels and limited children's broadcasting. But he was also very good, and just part of my childhood, part of many people's childhoods. And this is just a very fascinating and heartwarming story for the most part.
I have to second that. We watched that documentary a couple of weeks ago, so Mr. Dress Up, The Magic of Make Believe, and I learned quite a bit about it and had a lot of nostalgia overload, with including the puppets, Casey and Finnegan, who were key characters there. Of course, there's the Tickle Trunk as well. And then I kind of forgot about that whole second phase of Mr. Dress Up, phase of Mr. Dress Up, after the puppeteer behind Casey and Finnegan decided to retire and move out west here to, I think she's living in the Gulf Islands or something, and they had to get new puppeteers and new puppets. So, and it went on, for another decade plus with the new characters. I mean, they're kind of trash, if you ask me, but that's,
Me too.
but Ernie,
They tried.
They tried. But I'd kind of aged out by that point, I would imagine.
Yeah,
but Ernie
me
Coombs,
too.
again, a legend, seemed like a real nice guy. Has yet to be retroactively canceled along with Mr. Rogers. So they seem like genuinely good people. And, so that was the trifecta for me, was Mr. Dress Up, Mr. Rogers, and The Friendly Giant.
Oh, yes.
Another Canadian
He was
production.
also on for almost 30 years, and he's an OG. He started in like 58 or something like that.
But I'd forgotten that Fred Rogers and Ernie Coombs, Mr. Rogers and Mr. Dress Up, had been so close, and they've been in touch over the decades throughout their careers, and supported each other. So that's a good choice, good heartwarming choice. I mean, those puppets are kind of horrific in their own way. Happy Halloween, Jerome.
Oh, yeah. Well, if it's anything as good as the Mr. Rogers doc, then it will be good. My pick is nothing that is too new or special, because everyone knows about this game, but I've been playing it for months, and it's been...
Starfield? Starfield's only been out for a month.
This is way before that, dude. This is...
Yeah, I know.
And, Breath of the Wild was a massive open world, but here we have 3 levels. We have now, instead of just the ground...
For our audio listeners, what are we talking about, Jerome?
Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the direct sequel. And it's in fact the same world, so very unique in gaming because it's exactly the same world, but it's gone through something called the upheaval, which has changed everything. And it's now allowed you to go from beyond the ground world to a sky world, which is where you start the game, and then in a world called the depths. So essentially it's 3 times the amount of space and activities of Breath of the Wild, and you can even skydive from the sky world through the ground into the depths world, all the way through those worlds to the bottom. And the depths world is completely dark, so you need a way to see. And there are various ways to do that, but it keeps it very interesting and very kind of disturbing. So in terms of Halloween sort of feeling, is a very dark, especially the beginning of the game is quite dark when Ganondorf gets resurrected, an old version of Ganondorf, and he creates this upheaval that disrupts everything and also gives you access to the sky world, which I won't tell you how, but it involves some unknown history about Zelda and the kingdom of Hyrule. So it's opened up the story, and it's just amazing what you can do. And the amazing part of it is what you can build with the now custom build options in the game. There's endless YouTube videos of crazy stuff people have built that even after playing the game for months, you'll think, how on earth did they build that? And I need to build that, So, and there's these monster demon destroying weapons and stuff are just unreal. So now that I'm way ahead in the game and way beyond, early phases of the game, we're just building crazy stuff to see what it can do. And it's just amazing what you can do. Flying devices, tanks, weapons, so
space lasers.
Yeah,
I heard someone was building a space laser.
There's a laser a beam emitter. It's called the beam emitter, and it can be used in very interesting ways. So it's just endless. The game is three times the size of Breath of the Wild, and 100 times the possibilities because of all these Zonai device construct possibilities. So Lot
So
lot
did
of
Breath of
fun.
the Wild not allow you to build things?
No, you could not.
Oh, so it's a whole nother layer.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, you've also been playing this with one of your sons as well. I know some other young folks around your son's age have been really taken to the last couple of Zelda games too. And so, what's it like being able to collaborate with your son on this?
Well, it's great because there's in order to get hearts and to get the strength you need to defeat the Ganondorf, or in this game, the Demon King. A little bit of a giveaway there, but you'll find that out quickly enough in playing the game. You need to have hearts, and to get hearts, you need to you need to complete shrines which have puzzles. So I found out my son's quite good at figuring out these puzzles and figuring out how to do stuff that I just can't think of. And that's pretty cool to have him there and like think of these ideas. And he's like, "Why don't you build that?" I'm like, "That's impossible. Like, that's not going to work." And he's like, "Let's try it." And then turns out, well, he's right. That we can actually build that and it works. Like, what? You know?
See, that's fresh,
crazy.
That fresh perspective.
Yeah, so it's really fun to play with him because he'll think of these ideas and he's like, like, can I try that? And then he'll try to do stuff that I do and he can't do it. He's like, I'll leave that fighting stuff to you. And because it's I think the age is 10 plus or something on it, possibly, yeah, something like that. So he is a bit young, but he can definitely help with the puzzles and there's 120 of these puzzles at least that you can find, and so that's really helpful to have him help with those.
And is your son youngest son 7?
He's 7 now.
Yeah. So but if you're playing together, you can kind of monitor, and if there's if there are things that certain imagery you think might be a little disturbing, you can either talk about it or like redirect attention to other things. Or
that's an interesting thing too. Is like some kids would be very frightened by some of the Demon King stuff, but because it's like an entity of energy, he doesn't find it that disturbing. But some things he does. But it's done in a tasteful way that it's very dark. The game, as you go on, it gets very, very dark and like depressing and hopeless. And so it's different than Breath of the Wild in that way, but it's a lot more intense. And you at some point you don't know, like, how am I going to like resolve the dilemma and the issue in the game? You don't know, and you have to figure it out. And then if you continue, you realize what needs to be done and what's happening. But at very deep on in the game, you really don't know what's the objective. You don't really quite know. Of course, the Demon King is involved. You figure you have to defeat him, but you don't even know where he is. So it's a different story. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, where you knew exactly where Demon King was, Ganon was, and you knew what you had to do. And this one, you don't know. So it's deep.
So if you're going to get into this, basically clear your schedule for the next 2 or 3 years and dive in.
Because I mean, it's an ongoing thing. You can stretch it out, And some friends I know who have been playing it, they haven't finished it. They're just playing it, taking their time, So
good pick. My momentous pick this week, very quickly, just sort of to tag on to our horror movie choices from a little earlier. This is one that came out last year, and it's called Barbarian. And I had no idea what to expect, but the premise: a woman staying at an Airbnb discovers that the house she has rented is not what it seems. So written and directed by someone named Zach Krager, who I was not familiar with, starring Bill Skarsgård, Justin Long, who you may remember from the I'm a Mac, I'm a PC commercials back in the day, and other things. Other movies such as here's The Walrus, that was another weird one. Georgina Campbell as well. What else has Zach Krager done? He was in The Whitest Kids You Know, which is quite a funny sketch comedy series from back in the day, and he was an actor and not first for look like that was his first movie he directed. So pretty good, yeah. So Barbarian, pretty messed up, pretty original, pretty freaky. Highly recommended for those kinds of thrills and chills. But one of the reasons I chose it, there's a little bit of news. Apparently it's getting adapted into a video game as a single player title coming to consoles and PC. So not a lot of details on this yet, but it's coming from the same developers as Friday the 13th, the game, and Evil Dead, the game. So those are from Diversion 3 Entertainment. So I've not tried those games. I'm not a huge gamer myself, but we'll see how well that ends up. I know the crossovers either from movies to games or games to movies have mixed results at best. But if you enjoy the movie, maybe you'll enjoy the video game too. I think The Last of Us as a game that went to movie, that direction, pretty successful. Doom, maybe less so. But in terms of video games that have gone to movies, one of the more movies that have gone to video games, the Walking Dead ones were okay. I don't know. Will, can you think of any movies that have gone made video game versions?
Gone to video game? Well, yeah.
It's usually the other way around.
Yeah.
It is usually the other way
around. Yeah, because Hollywood's getting most of its
its
ideas from video gaming nowadays.
I'm waiting for the Zelda series.
Yeah, well, exactly. Oh, I'm sure it's coming someday. We'll have to get back to you all on that. Let's get to our projects, and then we can get back to Halloween. Will.
So, strangely enough, this is actually vaguely Halloween related. Even though I'm not a huge Halloween guy, I do kind of an annual spooky beats that's called Flares from the Crypt. And this is my third annual Flares from the Crypt. And, part of the reason I like to do this is just that it stretches my styles a little bit. It gets me to sort of do a different theme. So the idea here is that they're sort of more spooky, and they're sort of titled that way. And they're usually darker or heavier, or sort of got detuned piano or something in there that make it sound creepy, very high pitched. For me, even though I'm not a big Halloween person, I just find it as a challenge to do something different. And I also, do enjoy some of those old sort of pulp fiction type things with, Tales from the Crypt and all that kind of stuff as a kid. Watched some of that with my brother. So, again, pretty soft horror compared to some stuff these days, but yeah. So again, there's one named Predator there, but I hope everyone enjoys it. It's on Tableist.net and Table Beats app, and on the web looper on Tableist.net. So it's out now. Check it out.
Very cool.
Cool.
Looking at some of your titles there remind me of a couple other movies I forgot. Cabin in the Woods, amazing.
Yeah.
Postmodern.
Oh, that's a great movie. That is a horror movie that I actually like.
There you go. And wasn't that Joss Whedon directed that? And then of course I forgot to mention like the Ringu/Ring, the Japanese, and then the North American remake movie, and then of course the Ju-on and The Grudge. So if you're into Japanese water ghosts, those are great movies for you as well. So.
Nice.
See, your beats are even inspiring to the jogging the memory. Well,
yeah.
Jerome, your momentous project this week, something that was recognized at the Taipei 2024 game show.
Yeah, I was looking up info about this game to share it on our website, and then I realized, it won an award. And it's a horror game, so it's fitting today to talk about this. So it won an award, and it's done very well. This game.
What's it called?
Martha is Dead.
Okay.
So it's a super creepy wartime Italian game, and I won't talk too much about it, but just that if you're into horror games, it's one of the classics now. It's like got a lot of recognition for being just really immersing you and creeping you out when you're alone at home on the computer.
And what was your role in the game development?
I just worked on the Chinese version of this game. So, finding the actors and a lot of our team they just couldn't watch some of the scenes, and it was hard for them to work on it because it was too disturbing, some of the stuff. But the actors had to, pull it off and record it and get the right feeling. So that's a fun challenge.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
I guess with those sorts of games as well, the sound design is a big deal to add to the creepiness element. And so you get to do sound design on some of the projects you work on as well, right?
Yeah, we do sound design, and we haven't done for this kind of game yet, but we do a number of projects which is involving not only the actors, the dialogue, but the sound effects, sound design. So that's a big part of horror. I mean, it's a really important part, of course. So it's fun to work on those, when you get a chance. So.
And so people can find your work at, if I'm not mistaken, www.prosoul.com. That's the best place.
Yeah, and there's a link in the latest blog post on there to this game and the trailer, and as well as another one that came out not so long ago, which is super creepy, called Dead Space, which is a remake. So that if you want a creepy game to play during the season, then you should definitely check that out with the...
That's a classic.
Yeah. Necromorphs and
did we talk about that last time you were on?
We did.
Maybe?
We did talk about that when it came out.
Gotcha.
So it's not so new anymore, but it's a good horror one. Nice. And even John Carpenter gave it a thumbs up, which was awesome to see.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Oh man, we have to talk about horror video games next year.
There we go.
I got a couple that I actually like.
Yeah,
so.
there's some good ones out there.
I have to remember that one. All right. Decidedly less horrifying, hopefully. Our friend and colleague, Tasia Custodi, has yet another YouTube video for us. She's been on Google's PR list for the last couple of years, and so manages to get her hand on the latest and greatest devices. And she does a in-depth video on the Google Pixel 8 Pro. I think she did a video on it already, but this video is comparing the camera to the iPhone 15 Pro camera. So she bought herself an iPhone 15 Pro, and then she got the Google Pixel 8 Pro and did a head-to-head comparison, shot by shot. So you have to watch the video to see how the Pixel 8 Pro compared to the iPhone 15 Pro camera. Some good stuff there. And you can find Tasia's work at a couple places, youtube.com/Tasia Custodi and www.tasiacustodi.com. And speaking of Tasia, she and I are continuing to do our work on a little side project podcast called AI Named This Show. And the latest episode, which came out last Friday, was called Poisoning the Generative AI Well. And so in theme for this time of year, we got a little bit of imagery from the Ring or Ringu that we mentioned just a couple minutes ago. And thought that sometimes it's hard to think of imagery for certain AI titles. So it's always a fun challenge coming up with the titles and images to make an impression and intrigue people about what that might be about. So you can find more information on that little project at www.ainamedthisshow.com.
Good show, and very informative, just like Momentous Live.
Oh, yes, indeed. Well, thank you kindly, kind sir. And you can find out more about this ragtag crew here, including Tasia and Gray, who aren't with us this week. And hopefully Gray will be with us next week, and Tasia should be back in a few weeks at www.momentous.tv. Special thanks, Jerome, for joining us. We really appreciate you filling in and sharing with us all your picks and stories and projects. Good stuff. William, as always, and to you and those of you out there, we hope your week is truly horrifying or momentous. Your choice.